Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to be here this morning. I know that your lives and schedules are busy, so we appreciate you being here. We also appreciate you imitating your own children and sitting in the back row. That's great. That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
You didn't have them roped off.
I know. We should have cut off the last thing. No, y'all are fine where you are. I know we are actually going to be recording the session as well, so you may not want to be in the video.
They're going to be like, nobody came.
Yeah, we're just talking to an empty room.
We confirmed why they didn't come. Like,
For those of you watching, there are plenty of people in the back of the room.
Full. It's full.
So, I'm Sean Nestor. If I haven't gotten a chance to shake your hand, please let me know who you are by the end of the session today and who your child is that we get to care for on a daily basis. But this is one of the most valuable things that we do at Wesleyan, and I don't say that lightly because there's a lot of valuable things that we do at Wesleyan. But this is, as you're finding out, especially if this is your oldest child that you're here representing today, this is a very fun time of life for them, and they are learning all about what it means to grow up and become a human and an adult. And you are learning about how to parent them through that process. And maybe this isn't your oldest, so you've had a trial run and you feel like maybe you didn't do so great with it. So here we are learning some strategies today. But we're committed to partnering with Pathways to Life. So this is Ryan, and he is the founder of Pathways, and he'll tell you all about himself and his counterparts here. But their organization is phenomenal. They love the Lord as individuals, and as an organization, they're committed to serving Christ. Which is why one of the greatest reasons we feel comfortable bringing them in front of your children and in front of you as well. So they're going to be covering topics, and you'll hear the 3 sessions that they're going to do with your children, the different things that they'll discuss with them. But certainly for 6th grade, the most important thing that we'll talk about is puberty. And this is not a shift from what we have covered with 6th graders before, but it really is, it's just a better program in general. So it's a more all-encompassing understanding, hey, good morning, understanding puberty from a Christian perspective versus just a biological perspective, just the biological changes that are happening, but what else is going on with you emotionally, socially, spiritually at this time of your life. So that's what we're going to hit with your 6th grade child this year. I'll open us in prayer, and then I'll turn it over to them. Father God, thank you for today. God, we thank you that you are supreme over all things, that there's nothing that ever surprises you, that you've known everything that is supposed to take place today. You've known that for eternity. So God, we pray that in that we would take peace and courage in knowing that you see what's coming. And so we can know that we can come to you with whatever comes up today. God, we pray for Lex today as well. We continue to pray for his healing, his comfort and encouragement as well, and the entire Stoley family, God, Ashley and David, as they take on the challenging task of loving Lex well and still continuing to care for Kate and Libby in the process. God, we pray for every 6th grade student who will get to go through the Pathways program this year. Father, we pray that the information will fall on fresh ears, soft hearts, and that they would just begin to learn more about who they are and their image in Christ. We love you, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Good morning to you 1,000 parents out here. Should have been here live. No, I'm just kidding. So my name is Ryan Stringfield, like Sean said, and I get the privilege of leading Pathways to Life, and I'm actually the founder of Pathways to Life, so I've seen it since it was a vision and an idea. I've seen it evolve over the years to be able to partner with a lot of parents and a lot of schools and communities. So I'm really grateful to be here today. So what we're all about is building stronger communities through meaningful connections with students. And so we know that connection is what we were born for, right? We were born for connection, and so we crave it, we long for it, right? And we most find that through relationships, and so we're excited about the relationship that we've developed with Wesleyan over the years, and that we get to continue to support y'all and walking with your students. So I want to introduce you to my family. This is my lovely wife, Pamela, and my 2 boys, Josiah and Asa. And the significant part about why this agency started was really kind of the train wreck of my life. I was a young person with a ton of potential, tons of opportunities, incredible parents, grew up in the church, grew up in a community that was very loving and supportive. In my middle school years, I really started to kind of sense that maybe parents didn't understand some of the things that I liked and that I was interested in, so I started to kind of take my life offline, so to speak, in some of the decisions I was making, and really, I was really in some vulnerable, situations. And, a lot of it was connected to, I don't want to disappoint my parents, I don't want to get in trouble, and so I started hiding. And so I always tell young people, I was like, hey, where you're alone with yourself and where you're hiding is a vulnerable place to be. And it starts off with one thing, but it can progress to big things. And so my dream as a young person was to be a coach and a teacher. I was really gifted at athletics. I was really gifted at communication and social life. So it's not that I didn't like school. I liked school so I could be with my friends. And if I passed my classes, I could play sports. And that's really kind of what I cared about. And so my dream early on was to be a coach and a teacher. And so, and knowing that when you pursue things that are important to you, like finding your identity in sports and how well you play and in your friendships, and it can be a lot of fun, but there can also be a lot of rejection kind of wrapped up in some of those experiences as well. I remember the first time I ever sit the bench in sports was in 9th grade, when I transitioned from 8th grade to 9th grade, and how much that impacted me. And I ended up quitting 9th grade football because I was sitting on the sideline. By the second game, I was like, why am I not playing? And so I blamed the coaches and everything. I quit, played rec league. And later that year, I lettered as a varsity wrestler. And so I kind of found my niche in sports. And it was incredible, right? I found a sport where the coach doesn't get a pick, because when you play sports where the coach's opinion, they get to pick who they want to play, you don't get a say, right? But in wrestling, if you challenge somebody in your weight class and you win, you're in. So I made my way in. And then I also got my way in right into the upperclassmen situations that I wasn't prepared as a 9th grader to handle. So I got invited to spring break my freshman year with the 9th grader or the upperclassmen, and it was not good, right? A lot of drinking and binge drinking and really shameful and like not life-giving experiences, but somehow it was like, oh yeah, this is cool, right? And because I was not connecting with any of the key adults about some of the stuff that was going on, it left me in this vulnerable place. Now, throughout the rest of my high school years, I was about the girl I was dating and having a good time. I didn't use all the time, but I progressed in my use. I used tobacco, Copenhagen, and I was addicted to tobacco from the time I was probably 14 until I was in my mid-20s. And then marijuana use started, and it was a slow fade. It wasn't like I smoked weed all the time because I was super engaged in a lot of sports and a lot of activities. But over the years, it progressed a little bit till the time I was a senior, had a scholarship to wrestle, kind of had my high school sweetheart. My whole life was kind of planned out. And that year, we had a huge breakup. So I had this breakup, and it was a public thing. It was very shameful for me. And at that point, I started to use to really kind of cope with the rejection. So I smoked weed right through my senior year of wrestling. Never really did that before. I got to the end of my wrestling season. In the last semester of school, I missed a lot of school. In order to keep up with my weed habit, I had a little peddling weed habit. And so I get ready to transition to college, and you think that I just kind of pump the brakes? No, I press the gas. And so I transitioned from Orlando, Florida to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to Georgia State before Title IX. And when I got up here and I got to college, I wasn't ready for what college opened up for me. And so it started the tailspin for me. So from 18 to 26, 27, a lot of legal trouble and consequences. Oh, I'll get better. And really, I wanted to change. I really did want to change. But I never really invited somebody into that vulnerable place with me. And so in May 16, 2001, I ended up going to prison. So it's a pretty sobering time for me. I'm sitting in jail. I can't get out, no bond. But it was really the redemptive time of God's pursuit in my life. I heard the gospel. A guy came in and preached the gospel, and he preached about the pursuit of God through discipline. And he said, the funny thing is, you think you're being punished. And he's like, but the beauty of our God as Father is he crushed Jesus. He punished Jesus so he could pursue you. And it was like, what? And I was like, what? So I had this encounter where it was like, God has been pursuing me. And I was overwhelmed with the love of God. I was on the floor like a puddle of tears and snot. But it was because I was like, God came for me. I'd like to say that I got out, like I just got out of trouble, but I didn't. Part of God's grace is consequences, right? We learn through the process. And so everything I had my identity kind of wrapped up in while I was incarcerated, it just kind of, the Lord separated it all and began to tell me who I was in Christ. Now I paroled out in 2003. And I had a lot of stuff I had to work through. Got into recovery, struggled a little bit, got into recovery. My church family that kind of discipled me and helped launch me into my life and my purpose and calling was Perimeter Church here in Johns Creek. Got plugged in and Celebrate Recovery. And I kind of had to go back in and say, okay, where did this all start? And really what it started with, the strategies I was using in middle school, right? You know, the cover up, the hide, the identity search for significance. And out of that, I just started telling my story. I got an opportunity to be a volunteer to outreach, and I was like, you'll let me do that? And they were like, yeah, because who I was not what I did, right? And so in serving at a local outreach, the guy who was leading was a huge man, a large man. And one day we were wrestling around, and I threw him in a headlock, and like everybody saw it. They were like, oh my gosh. Well, another guy who was a coach at Northview High School, he said, wow. He's like, you wrestle? I said, yes. And I told him my story, and he said, hey, would you like to help us start this wrestling program? So now I'm at Northview High School, and I got a job as a wrestling coach. And so through those experiences, God began to, unfold the calling and path before me. So in telling my story, I was like, what I wanted to do was make sure the church was an authentic and safe place. So I started support groups at the local church, at Perimeter Church, and I was telling my story constantly in the community, and got a lot of opportunities to speak in schools. And what was happening was in 2009, you know, I know a lot of you have heard of the opiate crisis and how it's impacting our nation. Well, it was impacting the Johns Creek, Alpharetta community. We had 2 kids from our local community that died. One was connected to substance use and mental health, and he committed suicide. And another one had a sports injury where he tore his ACL playing lacrosse. He was already actively using marijuana and alcohol, got onto the pain pills, and you know the story. And so I kept getting pulled into these meetings, and they were like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I don't know, what are we going to do? And so I started doing school-based work in 2011, and the rest is kind of history. And so that's, you know, how we've evolved. We're all about prevention, and we're not the just say no people. Our prevention strategies are helping kids understand what's going on inside of them in these critical transitions and how to navigate the world outside of them, right? And we know that the world is very different today than it was when we grew up, even 5 years ago, right? It's very different. And so we get to speak into that. And then ultimately, sometimes crisis shows up, and in its early stages, crisis sometimes becomes the opportunity for greater growth, right? And to break out of patterns that can be destructive. So we do crisis intervention, and then we have support, right? It's all about creating opportunities for people to connect with meaningful relationships. So our work is really targeting kids in the transition zone. And so I don't know if you know this, but from the age of like 12 to 20, there's a critical time of growth and development. It's not just neurological, it's psychological, it's intellectual, it's emotional, it's social, it's even spiritual. And the way that kids are engaging in this season are really kind of it's setting the deck for how they're going to cope and connect and navigate, you know, stress and challenge as an adult. And so it's a very critical time of growth and development. So all of our work is kind of strategizing how do we help young people and parents and the people that are speaking into their lives in these transitions make sure that kids have meaningful connections, right? What I've learned in my experience is the opposite of addiction is not necessarily the absence of a substance or a behavior. It's really the presence of meaningful connections in your life and the skills and support to navigate life, right? Because life can be difficult. We all have challenges we got to work through. We always tell the kids, I'm like, you're a mess, you know, and tell your friends are a mess. And your parents, we're all a mess, you know, but we've got to figure out how to work through it in a healthy way, right? I mean, it's not an excuse for a kid to do whatever they want, but we want kids to know that it's okay that they have areas that they're limited in and that they need work. We all do, right? And we get that work and that support through one another. So one of the things about today's world is very different is kids have more access to things than ever before, right? They have access to information overload, right? Stimulation all the time, information, they're bombarded. And they also have access to dangerous things, right? And our world is all about instant access, and what's become accessible is quickly been deemed as acceptable. And so it's very challenging for them because in this time of critical growth and development, they're hearing all kinds of stuff that's counter to what you're teaching them, right? What you want them to pick up, what they're hearing at church, what they're hearing at home, and what they're getting exposed to is very different. And so how do we make sure that we're connecting with them meaningfully in this transition? And what we know is that this type of philosophy and strategy, which is very widely accepted, can be really dangerous. Lots of access to crazy stuff. And we all know about the vaping crisis that's sweeping across our country, and especially even this community here, where 1 out of 5 high schoolers are in regular use cycles of nicotine products and other chemicals through vaping devices. 1 out of 20 middle schoolers. There's some research that's done by a Georgia student health survey that's done every year by the Georgia Department of Education. And in this North Fulton corridor right here, this North Gwinnett, North Fulton corridor, the amount of middle schoolers that are using is very high. It's like 20% in some of the public schools around here. And I know that you guys know that I mean, just being here in a private school doesn't mean that they don't have access, right? And there's not kids that are engaged in that. Probably less than that, I would assume, but it's around, right? And accessible. And then we have the THC issue as far as marijuana. Now, medical marijuana has been legalized in Georgia. There's still constraints around the law. You can't necessarily inhale it. But every state where they've legalized marijuana, within a couple years, they've moved to the recreational space. And so the problem with that is that the THC content is way different than it was, especially like 20 years ago. But even in the last 5 years, the THC content is going through the roof. And that's because, our ingenuity as a society, you can create a man-made environment where you can accelerate the process, of growth. And in that, what's happening is every crop, they're getting stronger marijuana. And so some of the THC levels of yes, ma'am?
I'm so sorry to butt in and interrupt you.
Yeah.
And I hope this is not off topic.
No, yeah.
So one of the issues that has concerned me related to this new legal marijuana issue is related to travel.
Yeah.
Because I have been in states where now marijuana is legal.
Yep.
And run into the situation where obviously I was around it, related to being able to smell something.
Yeah.
Concierge in the hotel was like, yes, it's legal, it's out there. So do you know the information on what the second hand because I mean, obviously we were not doing it, but I mean,
Right.
it would be like walking down the street or get into an Uber.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's, hey.
They were hotboxing in there before you got there.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm sorry, but I was just told by the concierge at my hotel that this smell, and I'm like, I don't think I wanna be in your car.
Right.
Type thing, and of course it's all, it's legal, so it's no big deal, but I mean, I wouldn't get in a car with a drunk.
Right.
So, do you know, I mean, especially for kids, what the potential second hand, because I mean, literally I've told my mother, I'm like, well, when they start drug testing the kids here, I mean, what if you're in Colorado skiing, and they may not be doing anything, but what if
Right.
you're exposed to secondhand something from, just walking down, I mean, my child literally saw a weed truck and pointed it out to us, she's like, look, it's like an ice cream
It
truck.
is like an ice cream truck.
And I'm literally like, so I mean, do we just, not go to New York to see her play until she graduates? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't do that, we're not interested in that, we don't want to be around that, but like we obviously were. So I'm
Right.
like, what is the,
Yeah. Well, I mean, secondhand smoke can be damaging, but it's not going to cause your child to
like suddenly have a problem?
yeah, or to even where they would fail a drug test. It might, if you see a truck and they're slinging weed out of the side of it like ice cream, it might, kind of change their perspective of like, maybe this isn't so bad, right? Because I mean, I like ice cream. You like, everybody here like ice cream?
Well,
Right? It's like, if you like ice cream, and they're making the connection.
'Cause, I mean, in Georgia, I'm like, okay, thank God it's not legal here, but I mean, it's
Not
like,
yet.
what is
You
my?
might always say yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, but I mean, as my responsibility as a parent, not only like, I mean, as a West End parent, I'm like, seriously, at what point am I like being irresponsible letting her be in New York?
Yeah, well, which is a great question, and part of it is that, and this is early, this statement in my presentation, but I got little boys, you see them, right? And they've got our family history, you know what I mean? So they got all of our great attributes, but they all got all of my mental health and, you know, substance use stuff too as well, right? And it's like, we can't take all of the bad things out of the world, right? And so, you know, part of Wesleyan bringing us in and the schools we partner with is that we want to be proactive, because we want you to be the one to bring your voice and help filter the conversation with the information you want to bring, because your kids are going to be exposed to this stuff. They're going to hear, they're going to see stuff, I mean, shows. I mean, how many kids watch Netflix and YouTube? Your kids watch that? Okay, well, I mean, none? Okay, well, so when they do, you know, there's all kinds of content they're going to get. And a lot of the shows, you know, weed is an essential part of the interactions. Weed and sex pretty much weave through every narrative and every show and every videos that the kids like in the movies. And I mean, so this is something that, you know, we have to help you be proactive to speak into. Sean, you might have.
Well, and to that point, so one of the things that Pathways does really well is they debunk a lot of these myths and educate kids, first of all, on what THC is, and why the fact that the content is so much stronger in vaping materials, juuling materials, and marijuana that's produced nowadays. Why is that an issue versus, you know, oh, well, my grandma uses medical marijuana for her knees, right? Like,
right.
It helps them understand the difference in those two things. But also, what he's saying is, to prepare you, we send out talking points ahead of the lessons, so that you can either talk with your student beforehand or on the back end of the lessons. Again, they're presenting to the group, but we want you to have those specific conversations with your child about, how does our family feel about this, or what does this mean as a Maxwell or as a, you know, as a Dwyer? What does that mean for our family?
Yeah, so I mean, in sixth grade, I mean, when you'll see our lessons, like, we're not covering a lot of this. I think it would be great to maybe consider increasing and starting to talk about it. And so we can help filter some stuff for you to help you be proactive to have the conversations. But so THC and the marijuana thing, and they're living right in the middle of it, right? I mean, so we want to help y'all be prepared to help them, you know what I mean? As they're gonna have to, they gotta make a decision, right? They're gonna have, this is the world that we live in, and so we can't, you know, we can't think that they're not gonna be exposed to this stuff, right? And so we want them to be prepared to understand what's going inside of them and how to navigate the world that we live in today. And so then, of course, prescription drugs, you know, and when we talk about prescription drugs, we don't demonize them, because we know a lot of children are on prescription drugs, but we talk about the overprescription, and in particular, the opiate crisis and how it's connected to this. I mean, there was more overdoses in, I think it was like 1,600 in 2017, and every year it just kind of keeps going up. And so there's a lot of work that's being done through prescription drug monitoring programs to keep prescription drugs, especially opiate-based pain medication, out of people that don't need it, away from kids that are having surgeries in their mouths. There's a lot of alternatives, lots of great work. But what happens is that when people get addicted to these pain pills, and now they don't have access to them, then it increases the likelihood that they'll try other things. And so we have this opiate crisis, and any place where there's a demand, you know what I mean, there'll always be a supply. I went to a thing at Johns Creek High School that was in Johns Creek Chamber at St. Ides Country Club, and it was a follow-up to the Triangle. And it was like, I guess 4 years after that news story came out. And it was Chief Dunsmore, and they were talking about the incredible work they're doing in North Fulton and Alpharetta and Johns Creek and Forsyth to kind of arrest a lot of people. But he's like, we've confiscated more drugs in 7 months, opiates, in 7 months than we did the previous year. And so we're not going to arrest our way out of these problems. We've got to help young people and families be prepared to navigate the world that we live in, right? And so I know that it's overwhelming. Like I said, we can't take this stuff out, but we've got to help speak into the things that drive the use, right? So we know technology is incredible, but it can also be a huge challenge for young people, right? The average amount of from 13 to 18, the average student spends young person 9 hours in front of a screen. And some of it is just, it's their world, right? I mean, their books are on the tablets, and then after school they got to do homework and projects, and then their social lives are on that. And so 90% of them say that it's a problem, but it's their world. So how do we help them develop healthy boundaries and coping strategies and disconnecting points, right, where they can do that. You know, one of the things we always work with kids is how you sleep is so critical to how your body processes like your stress and how your body resets every day when you hit REM sleep. But you know, when the sun goes down, that your eyes sense the shift in the light and start releasing melatonin to prepare you for REM sleep. And we have the screens in front of our face all the time. Our brains are getting tricked. And so a lot of times the issues that are coming is because we're not sleeping. We're never getting to that place of sleep. So how do we help our young people navigate that? And then obviously the dangerous content. I mean, pornography exposure is rampant. I mean, you know, kids as young as 8 years old. I mean, and it's clickbait is everywhere. I was on my sports app last weekend, and a porn company out of Miami, they went to the media and they were like, hey, we want to be the new sponsor for the United Arena, and it was a marketing stunt. Every sports app in every feed was the name of this company is called Bang Brothers, right? And they were like, it's a porn company. You think they really wanted to buy the arena out? No, they wanted their feed. They wanted clickbait out there. Who's got a sports app? How many people got a sports app? I mean, so we have to prepare our kids. The ads are coming. The Juuls, Juul, the guy they got sued by the FDA because all the ads, right, are targeting young people. So kids can get exposed to this stuff. They're getting that early exposure is how they ramp people in for the life in the long haul. Then how about social media? 60% of kids report some type of harassment or bullying on social media. Kids are measuring their value and their identity based on what they see in images, which when you have a bad day, who posts, I'm having a bad day? Nobody, right? All of the apps got filters, right, to take the blemishes. And so now they're judging their self and their value based on images, right? So how do we help kids navigate that? And then ultimately anxiety and depression are at an all-time high. I think a lot of it's connected to screen time and navigating technology, but then also pressure and stress. The kids they're like CEOs. They got a lot of stuff going on, right? We're always speaking to the kids. You got a lot of stuff going on. Families, we have a lot of stuff going on, and we need space to rest. And so it can leave you overwhelmed. You hear about a lot of this stuff, right? And so what we're trying to do is help you understand the call. We're calling you up to be proactive. And a lot of times parents don't speak up because they don't know what to do. And so in partnering with us, we want to try to help empower you and filter stuff to you to help you speak into the lives of your children. So here's how we accomplish our vision of building a strong community. We have strategies targeted towards students, right? We want to engage students, okay? But we also have strategies towards parents. We want to engage parents. We want to help parents, one, understand the world we live in, and then help them be prepared to speak in. We want to work with the faculty and the teachers to be able to do that as well. And so how we do that is what we do is we bring understanding, people of understanding, to engage people in critical transitions, right, and help empower them. All right, so here's what happens. A lot of times our understanding of things is about this much. It's like an iceberg. And so what it does is it leaves us in a vulnerable place. So we try to take what's on the surface and we try to take things deeper and more expansive. We want kids to understand the physical stuff, the intellectual, emotional, social, spiritual, and even neurological, which are all important things. And because our understanding is very limited in a lot of ways, right, we speak from our perspective. What it does is, and the kids have a limited perspective, it leaves them in a really vulnerable place. And it makes it really difficult for them to navigate risk, right? Because what the whole vaping thing, it's a safe alternative to cigarettes. You're not getting all the chemicals, and marijuana, it's legal, it's medicine, and all these things. Technology, we have to use it. It's a great tool. It helps me, organize and do so. It's like we have to be able to speak into that. All right, so here's the topics we're going to cover. And sorry, I hope I didn't scare you at home. God is on the throne. He's still on his throne, and that's our hope as believers. So here's our topics. We're going to be engaging 3 times this year, 6th graders, your students, and we'll be doing a DNA lesson. We'll be doing a lesson on the care of the body, and then God's design for this transition for them of puberty, right? And so here's what we'll be covering. And the DNA topic, our DNA is usually, we focus on a substance and a skill. And so we'll be doing goal setting, intro to alcohol, and intro to vaping and nicotine. We start off with a dream car activity. We ask them to think about their dream car and what it would be, and then we ask them, would you let your friends drive it, and what would you do to take care of it, and all those things, and then it's like, okay, well, then we introduce kind of their brain, right? It's kind of like their brain, right? Your brain is the command system for your life. You only get one of them. We want to help you be prepared to protect that. We do that by helping them understand the importance of setting goals to get traction towards their potential and their passions and how to really do that. We teach them the goal setting criteria. They do a worksheet. Then we talk about how things in the world are confusing. We do a little thing on optical illusions. And then we intro into the messaging around alcohol ads and vaping ads, right? And so we're bringing this, what sets our expectation and our perception of harm. And so how do we see how even, ads are designed to influence us and set the expectation. And then ultimately we'll come back to the brain. It's all about the brain. Addiction is a brain thing. It's not you're a bad person. I teach kids we're wired to be dependent. I try to take the addiction word out because it can be so scary. And I want to teach them about dependence. We depend on things all the time. God wired us to depend on things, right? To rely on things, natural and in the spiritual. So we want to normalize this and say, if you depend on something over and over and over again, what happens? You develop a pattern or a relationship. And if you're not dealing with the underdriving motivators to those things, then you can get dependent on anything, right? And hopefully we get addicted to God, right? We get dependent on God. That's how we were wired, to be dependent on God and on each other. So we normalize that, and we help them explore kind of the impact of alcohol and nicotine on the brain. Cool? All right, so care of our bodies. Why our bodies will change. We teach them about puberty, how to treat our body. We talk to them about healthy physical bodies, right? So what we eat, what we put in, garbage out. Our bodies are different since we're all unique, right? In our individual expression in our identity, we're all going to progress at different stages through this. So we want to normalize and try to speak into that comparison trap that we all fall into. Sleep is important. This is where we really talk to them about the sleep and understanding that as a part of their growth and development. We talk to the boys about the importance of baths and how to make sure that their bodies are changing, so odors start to come, and the importance of when they're involved in all these activities, they got to take a bath. The girls, now these are actually gender-specific groups, so we separate them to have these conversations. The girls, they'll speak about their bodies changing and how that leads to the period. And then the boundaries, that are important, like nobody touches your body but you, right? Nobody touches your body but you, and how important that is. And then ultimately, we also talk to them about you're not just changing physically, you're changing intellectually, and how you process information emotionally, and so how there can be mood swings. Anybody in the mood swings phase yet here? And how that can show up, which is just normal. It's your body's changing. We want to normalize this, and this is one of those critical transitions, right? From the transition zone that we want to speak into. In the next lesson, we'll talk to them about the spiritual aspects of that. Even Jesus, in the Bible, it says that he grew in wisdom and stature. So he had understanding, right, and his consciousness and his state of being, and then also his physical body, right? And so we normalize that. And so we talk about the different stages and how that works. We talk about the evolution in all of our stages of life. We're constantly evolving, and the importance of that, how our bodies evolve. We talk about the catalyst for change, which is God is in charge. It's the hormones, it's the emotions, it's all of those things that are a part of that. And then ultimately, with that hormone change becomes attraction, right? So you see a lot of times in 6th grade is where that's kind of shifting a little bit. But in 6th grade, they're like, ooh, girls, and then halfway through, they're like, ooh, girls, so, or vice versa. And so helping them understand that is normal, that God wired us to notice beauty, right? And affirm that in one another, in attributes, and how that kind of plays out. We can talk about how that gets distorted, right? And how we put so much emphasis on the physical body. And we really focus a lot of this on you're changing here physically and emotionally, but it's really about how you're becoming your character, who you are and your inner person that matters most. And so this is kind of the intro level to what we start there. So those are the lessons we'll cover when we're getting ready to do that. We will send out the week of so that it won't get buried in emails and lost. We'll give you our talking points so that you'll be able to follow up with them. And a lot of the conversations you probably already had. If not, it's an opportunity to kind of lean in with that. Is there any questions about that?
How long are the sessions?
Yeah, they're like 45 minutes, and so we try to, they're interactive, so it's not just the talking head, so we'll have them do an activity, and we're engaging them in a conversation so they can interact, but it's about 45 minutes to, about 45
And they do it during their PE class. So this means that throughout the course of the year, 3 PE classes, they'll meet with Pathways instead. And like you said, for the puberty lessons, they'll be gender separate. So it'll just be the girls for that PE class will meet with Aaron, the boys for that class will meet with Ryan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do a good job. I wasn't a good host here. So this is Erin. Yeah, and she is my counterpart here. And so it'll be her and I that'll be here speaking and teaching. And so your girls are in good hands here. You want to tell them a little bit about yourself? Or, yeah, just so you can
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. Speak to the audience.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Erin Esslinger. Just joined Pathways this summer. My husband and I have been in youth ministry for about 12 years. He's currently working at Campus Church in Norcross, and I taught Bible at GAC for the last couple of years, 9th grade through 12th grade. I also taught a middle school class at GAC, so love it there. Super excited about working with Pathways and about working with your girls and your guys and DNA lessons. Yeah, think it's gonna be great. Nice to meet you guys.
Thank you. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about tips for parents. And I mean, I know that when you're transitioning from, adolescence to like becoming a teenager, the parenting styles, they'll need to shift, right? Especially because it's so important that our young ladies and men, they learn how to take responsibility. And I know that if a lot of times if we don't help them with some of those that transition and some of that stuff, like stuff gets dropped. But even in the dropping and in some of the I would say failure, right, and not following through and doing that, those become those opportunities for them to develop grit and resilience, right? And so I know the tendency is to be like, oh, no, I'm not gonna let them miss an assignment, and I'm not gonna let them not, and so sometimes releasing a little bit, to let some of that stuff happen here so they can learn how to work through stuff. And you can coach and support them in that process. So what we teach about when we talk to parents is this idea of control versus influence. And so when they shift, something happens about 7th grade, between 6th and 7th grade, where like they move from like your parents know everything and they want to talk to you more about stuff to like my parents don't know anything, right? And so, I mean, and that's, and some of them, they might act like, but they don't really believe that, right? And there's something that happens. So it's like, how do we help you shift from like this place of like helping tend to everything to like influencing, kind of coaching more and supporting in that role? And so control will lead to hiding, and this will be the natural byproduct of that is it's going to be like a conditional thing. And so kids will learn what they need to do, to meet what you want them to do on the surface, but they'll start to move away relationally. And so influence is about how do we call it shoot the wisdom and go. It's got to be a little bit of time, and it's got to be at the right time, right? And figuring out what are those right times to have conversations about the things that you need to have. So conversations, we always encourage parents to be more vulnerable. I know for when we work with young people, a lot of times when we're divulging and being vulnerable ourselves, it's like an accelerated pathway to their hearts. Because then it's like, oh, it's okay for me to be kind of struggling with stuff. And there's that tension, right? Because it's like, well, if I tell you, I'm going to get in trouble. And so vulnerability and modeling that and taking responsibility and owning your emotions and your choices and even your limitations as a parent creates that connecting point for them. And being positive, open, vulnerable, yeah, and do that with discretion. It's not like you got to pull out all your, scars and, tell your parents, or your students, but at age-appropriate levels, you want to begin to, your life can be an incredible lesson to them if you're willing to steward even the tough stuff that you walk through. Make encouragement, curiosity, and a habit. So we always say calling up all the time. Call them up. Everything that they're doing well, affirm them in that. Affirm them in that. Affirm them in, encourage it. When you see a strength, when you see an asset, when you see them, struggling well, when you see them take responsibility, when you see them do something well, praise them, lift them up, encourage them, so that when you do get to speak into those other areas where they need some help, then it's the volume is different. Does that make sense? They'll receive it if you're calling them up and you're calling them up and calling them up. Spend a lot of time building them up in that, and then when they have their shortcomings, you can speak and they'll receive it better. So calling them up. Encouragement makes the child feel safe. Curiosity, ask lots of questions, and I know when you ask the first question, what do they say? Good. I'm good. That's it. I'm like, good what? What does that mean? Good food? Good, tell me more. And here's what we always say is, give me a high and give me a low. And then when they tell you what it is, you be like, tell me more. Really? Thank you. Tell me more. And then asking the Holy Spirit to give you the next question to kind of take them down a little bit beneath the surface, right? They're going to tell you what they're thinking and what they're feeling. If you can help them get down to what were you hoping was going to happen? What was your desired outcome? What did you hope was going to happen when that happened, right? Tell me more, asking questions. Focus on the whole child. Children are more than their academic, right? Did you do this? The responsibilities and all that. They're managing a lot. I mean, I always teach the kids, we're just like, man, you know what? How many classes you got? They're like 7. We're like, okay, how many of you have passions outside of class? And they're like, oh, how many of you have sports and church? And they're all like, and I'm like, man. I was like, you know what parents do? And I was like, most parents, we teach, or your teachers teach one subject, right? Your parents have one career, right? One kind of niche in their job. You guys are in an incredible stage of development. We can't do that anymore, right? And it's like, they've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. And if it's only the details and the grades and stuff, they'll get lost, right? They'll feel like they're lost. Focus on their emotional life, their spiritual life, their social life. Tap into the areas. Pressure's building. We know that they're stressed out. And we normalize stress. We're like, hey, stress is important. And what does it do? It tells us there's demands on our bodies that is giving us feedback that we need to listen to. Feedback is so critical, right? In our physical lives, in our emotional life, but also in our relational life. So give them feedback, and the pressure's mounting. It's mounting on them, right? And different kids navigate different pressures differently. Some of them act like it's not there, and they're not, but it's still there, right? And then some of them are very acutely aware of it, and they just get stuck in it. So speak to those areas of pressure. Listen to your child and be present, be patient, ready to listen, avoid criticism, and lectures don't work. Especially for isn't it crazy how when my little kids, they'll ask questions all day long. Daddy, teach me something. I'm like, son, we're in bed. He's like, teach me something. Before we go to bed, he wants to learn something. He wants me to stay. He wants to stay up, right? But it's all the questions. Well, in 6th and 7th grade, they stop asking all the questions. You know why? They're formulating their own answers based on their previous experiences and their knowledge and their perspective. They're forming their own answers, right? And so how can we begin to say, oh, really? What do you think about that? And not be like, don't think that. No, you can't think that. And be like, oh, tell me more about that. Why? Have you ever considered why? Where did you learn that? Helping go in there, avoid criticism. There's that calling up thing again. The calling down. They'll run away from you. They'll learn how to hide. They won't connect. It's okay for the conversation to happen over time. You can't have these long conversations with them. They have to be short. And their little brains, with all this little change in technology, they're in that hunter-gatherer place all the time. And so it has to be short snippets and bite-sized. Answer their questions and then know the facts. And so that's where we come in. We want to partner with Wesleyan to kind of funnel some content to you all, right, to help you speak into the narratives, right, and the issues of the times. And so we'll start the conversation, but we can help funnel stuff to you. And then ask for their perspective, their thoughts, and their reasoning. Really, why do you think that? And tell me more. And keep going. Don't try to like replace what they think. Once you find out where they're at, do your work. And then you pray redemptively, God, how can I create a space to be connected with them? Because that's what we need. You know, we need you want to be connected with them so you can influence them. We want you to be connected so you can influence. Okay, any questions? Awesome. Well, you can access us through our website. If you need help, like we always tell parents, if you got something going on, you think that you don't sweep it under the rug, right? Like if you need somebody to get in there to help you get an expanded view on that, and it's always easy to interrupt something in its infancy than letting things progress. One of my deepest regrets is I had incredible people around me, incredible coaches. My parents were awesome. I mean, my church was great, right? I mean, yeah, they had their issues, all of it, but at the end of the day, like, they were awesome. I wish I would have opened my mouth, right? And it wasn't where I was at in those early choices. It's where those things go if they're hidden. Everything grows in the dark. And so at Wesleyan, I know they're trying to create a safe community for authenticity. And I know it can be really challenging here, because it's like, oh, is it really safe for me to really share? And so if you need to get an outside perspective, you can call us and we can help you. If we're not the right fit to help you figure out what's going on, we can help connect you. So thank you all for being here this morning. You do have a question?
Not really a question.
Oh, okay.
But I'm thinking you should come talk with the kids once a week instead of.
I would love to be able to talk once a week with them.
I just read a good article in a scientific psychology journal that talked about, you were saying, there's a lot of anxiety with kids today that's linked to the technology. And it was picking it apart scientifically, saying that, before we had all these, electronic devices, part of the functioning of the brain while you're awake is processing things that you're thinking about, concerned about, that are going on in your life. And with constantly our electronic devices available to us, your brain doesn't have that time to think through and pause, work out the difficulties.
Right.
And you start to feel anxious, and what do? You pick up your device and you start doing something to distract yourself.
That's right.
And that's why the anxiety is building. And so
Right.
the very thing that's causing it keeps blocking it.
Yeah.
Because we
That is so
don't
right.
want to deal with it. And so we just work really hard with our kids,
Yeah.
not even letting them use it at least an hour before bedtime, so that they're
Yes.
still awake.
Yes.
To have those brain pathways to
Right.
be working through things and sorting through them.
That's right. We call it consolidation and contemplation. They have no space for that. Well, your body's giving you feedback. Well, what happens if you never listen to the feedback? Spouses, what happens if you don't listen to the feedback in your
Right.
relationship?
Right.
What about feedback from your boss and the customers?
Yeah.
They don't have any space for that. And it's really just their world. And what it does is it short circuits their development. And then our brains are wired for homeostatic balance, right? Regulation of pain and pleasure. They have distress, anxiety. On a subconscious level, it's still there, whether they're distracting themselves or not, it's growing. So these issues, they turn into mental health challenges. Anxiety, in the early infancy, it's a fight or flight thing, right? I mean, it's a protective factor. What happens when you don't listen? It turns into a disorder. Depression, it's good to feel sad moments, right? To balance out things, and grief, and we spare it. What happens if you don't deal with the grief and you never come to terms and work through the grief? It turns into depression. And so having that space and knowing that technology becomes that thing that keeps them from having that space. And so thinking out, how can I create space and help create space for that to happen? That's great feedback. There's incredible research. There's a book by this guy named Nicholas Carr, and it's called The Shallows. And it talks about how even the internet creates shallow thinkers and shallow depth in relationship, because it breaks down our ability to even be present in the moment. Yeah. Because, the hunter, and he talks about the hunter-gatherer, and it was all about survival before. If you weren't paying attention, you weren't going to eat. You know what I mean? If you didn't catch the storm coming and you didn't plant your plants in the right place and you miss out on that feedback, you die, basically, right? And then we went into this place where like it was all about, you know, contemplative, you know, and the knowledge age where you get all the books and reading and contemplation and all that. And then when technology came, it's like back to the hunter-gatherer. And so it keeps our brains from really being able to just be. And we need that place, right? We need that contemplative, you know, place to consolidate and process. That's very good feedback.
I have
Yes.
one solution, the flip phone. Talk and text.
Yeah, well, listen, I was talking to a friend of
I
mine
wish
last
they
night,
would
what we're
just-
gonna do with our kids, and I'm like, cause you wanna be connected with them, so I'm doing a technology landmine talk with the 10th graders, in about an hour. And, you know, it's their world, but we gotta help them understand that, you know, the landmine, they're there, you know what I mean? And it's like, and it's a part of your world, and you can walk around it, you know what I mean, and you can engage with it, what happens when you step on it? I mean, right, it's buried there, but like you step on it, like, right? And so we're trying to be proactive in that. And this is one of the big conversations we're having with them is around the technology. Any other questions?
To that piece, really quickly, you mentioned, and Maxwell, so he mentioned that with the 10th graders, we do work with pathways 6th through 12th grade, and Heidi Lloyd, the high school counselor, and myself, we've sat down, so we select what they talk to the students about, and we've scaffolded it to build annually. So what they're learning this year will be built on next year and then the following year. So like he said, it's kind of an intro to the drugs and alcohol. It's an intro lesson. You feel free at home to go as deep into that as you would like to go. But with the group, we're gonna do an intro this year and then we expand on it and build on it in the years coming.
Yeah.
On this,
Yes,
specific to that?
we build and we continue to talk more about that as they get older, yes.
Because, you know, this is a great tool, and I think it's a tool, but, you know,
Yeah.
my hammer's a great tool, and I walk around in my pocket. You know? But, you know, it's weird, like, I'm a note taker, and so for years when I go to church, it would bother me to see an iPad or see this. And then over time, I realized a lot of people reading the Bible or following along. There's a fluke probably 4 years ago. I forgot to take it out of my pocket because I always left it in the car. And so what I wound up doing was taking notes on my phone, which I just took notes on your presentation, which was excellent, by the way. And so what I found over time, because I have this with me all the time, I'm able to go back to it much more accessible than my notepad. So there's value in having it, but it also changed my perception because I used to look at people in a diminished way, going,
Yes, sir.
what are they doing? You know, they're
Right.
doing this, they're doing that. And now I wonder if people look at me, because I'm in church taking notes. You know,
Yeah.
everybody thinking I'm messing around on my phone. So, I know it's a tool. I come home, I plug it in. Unfortunately, I'm married to someone who's addicted to it. I'll tell her that.
Me too.
No secrets in this community.
It's on the
No.
camera.
Well, and let me tell you, her mother is like that, and she's in town. And our oldest one's like that. So, I mean, you know, you talked about DNA, and you can't run from your genes, and
That's
after
one of the
fall
main
from
things we
tree.
teach them about too, is about their
It's
brains.
a great tool, but it's, you know, you really gotta manage it to your point about like regulating your body and listening to feedback. If you're constantly churned up with that, you're never gonna be at peace.
That's right.
So, anyway,
Yeah,
I
great
think you might even wanna make a bigger focus on this thing because
Yeah.
it's just.
We weave it into every talk we talk about. When we do substance talk, we talk about a skill. We talk about what is a driving factor and a skill, but also we talk about substances, but it's all about this, the brain and the body's response to stress. You know, and then how technology is kind of driving the train on a lot of that, you know?
And
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
okay, you
Yes.
spoke about how kids get exposed to drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. Now at this point, like when I see, you know, I mean, in my home, we really watch TV,
Yes.
there's hardly any television.
Yeah.
There's not many shows or movies other than the kids movies, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I'm trying to identify from what channel does this come through, you know what I mean? Because in
Yeah.
my children, if technology they use it for educational or maybe they game or they maybe see some like a kids movie.
Yeah.
And other than that, like, I mean, even the information that you were talking about today, it's kind of like even new to me.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
even I wasn't exposed to all this when I was growing up.
yeah.
So I'm just trying to identify how do kids get exposed to
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well, and really what it is online. I mean, the online, so like if they're watching movies online, like where are they watching it through? So, I mean, every app, and every app they use, I mean, you know this, every app that kids have there's a messaging component. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, it's very challenging, but so the online world is really hard to block out stuff. So, I mean, if they're accessing videos and, you know, children's movies, they can access just as easily any other content. YouTube, I mean, all the video streams, Netflix, unless you've got some serious like blocking software, some software to block it. I mean, you can get Disney and pornos and they're not far apart. You know what I mean? I mean that's why I was talking about the clickbait. So I mean, you've got to become more familiar with what are the different apps and what are they watching and how even those apps are being targeted by these other industries and the movies and the shows. I mean, I watched a commercial the other day. I don't really watch commercials, but I was watching a football game real time, which never happens, but it was a commercial and it was a Toyota Corolla commercial. And you see these two kids pull into a car wash, and then you see them like going through and the soap's going through and there's a couple people in there and they're older people or whatever, and they drive through and it gets down to the end and you see the kids climbing out of the back seat and they're like laughing or whatever, and then it says from dirty to clean, you know, and then and then it gives their tagline, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, they're using sex to sell Corollas, you know what I mean? And they were young kids and they were attractive, and I mean, they didn't show anything, right? But what was, you know, our minds are created to fill in the gaps, right, with a narrative. To sell a car. That's a car commercial. Like, sex drives everything in our society. And so, you know, right now they're watching kids' movies, but they've got access to different apps. Those same kid movies, they got rated R content and even explicit content that they can access. So if there's ways that we can...
And even on the QT over here, I mean, one of the biggest things right on the door is advertising vaping, right? So come buy a Coke and a vape, right? Like, so it's
the CBD shops and all the stuff. I mean, you know, it's... Yeah. Nicotine is vaping devices. They sell them at QT.
So that every gas station.
Yeah, everyone. Oh, they sell more than
Also,
that.
you can't discount the fact that, like, even if your house is if you feel like your house is on lockdown, technology-wise or whatever, kids have friends who have who their families may not do the same thing, or they have older siblings who appropriately, the siblings have more use than the sixth grader.
Right.
But they
Right.
are exposed to it, and
Right.
so it doesn't.
Well, and it's so hard to block.
Isn't enough.
Well, I mean, and the kids, they're so tech savvy, they can get around pretty much everything. There's a way, and then the people that are like trying to infiltrate their lives and their systems, the clickbait. I mean, think about that porn company, a sports app. Every sports app. If you got kids that like sports, they had that clickbait running through their thing, and it's still in the feed. And there's still like all this hype about it. I mean, and so yeah, I mean, it's very tough. I'll tell you this. I had a middle school parent reach out to me, and they are like hawks. I mean, the Christian private school, they know what their kids are doing, they monitor their stuff, and there was an app called TikTok, and they didn't know that there was a messaging component, and this little girl was about to go meet a boy from Texas that was supposedly coming for a baseball tournament, and she told her friend, and her friend was like, what? Her friend didn't even know. Her friend was like, I don't know about that, right? Called her parents, and it was basically, she was getting trolled. Like, she was getting catfished, and this account had a ton of little teenage girls, and it was not a teenage boy. And the hardest part about that is her heart got wrapped up in it too, because of what he was saying to her and all that. And so it wasn't just she could have got trafficked. It was the sadness and the broken heart that came out of that. And this was on an app, and they know, these parents, they know, they have the blockers, they have all that. And so, yeah, so that's where you've got to be equipped, but your kids also have to be equipped. And so we have to start teaching about this stuff. We think we can shelter them, and I think it's appropriate to do that, but this is the world we live in. And so while they're still formative, we need to speak in, but we can't speak in with scare tactics and all that either. We've got to bring reason and logic and support, and so we're here to help y'all do that. So
do you guys cover anything? I know that like some human trafficking, like this is a big hub, and I also know that, like, you know, girls walking around the mall, it's like they find a way to like get somebody off on their own, and you guys go into any of that, or?
We do not, so we've talked about that, as a school, we don't feel like it's appropriate
Yeah.
in the large group to do that. Please have those conversations
Yeah,
if you feel
yeah.
appropriate on that.
Well, and there's a ton of stuff on the internet you can find about this, but they're being targeted through social media is the new way that they're doing it. And then they'll get them to share
There's a
pictures.
Young Life meeting down there that somehow the address is near the Medlock Bridge Theater, and I wouldn't anymore take my child to that Young Life location than the Man in the Moon.
Right.
And I don't care if it's Young Life, it's next door to where I've been told there are police sitting in the parking lot because the kids are sex trafficked from the movie theater.
You told me
And Medlock?
141?
Imagine, wow, the legal position?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
How did they, I just, I'm enjoying all this, I'm learning a lot. So, how have the children in the sixth grade level sort of accepted this? What's been the experience, from your experience, or, seeing the children, maybe what insights you've gathered from them, how they've responded to it?
I mean, typically, this sixth graders have a lot of hype and energy, right? And so what we try to do is bring that out. So we have like interactive pieces and stuff. And they seem to be responding, from my perspective. I think some of the stuff I feel like they think they probably already know, but the way that we engage with it is more interactive, so it's not just information, we're not just talking to them. So we're asking them about their, like when for example, we talk to them about physical health, we talk to them about what they like to eat, and then they tell what kind of foods they like, and then it's like, so it's more than us just sitting there talking at them. They seem to respond fairly well, but they do have a lot of energy.
Next year,
Yeah, and then we build, so what happens is they get to develop a relationship to us, and they know, one of the kids came in and they was like, "Where's Mr. Ken?" And they're like, "He's got some big guns." And I'm like, "That's all you remember?" But they remembered Ken, and they were like, they loved him. Ken was like, he's got teenagers, so he was able to speak, to them in a way that they were affirmed. When they're asking for specific teachers, that's cool to me, because it means that they're connecting beyond the content.
And you're talking about Ken Griffin, used to teach here, all the time, but has had some family stuff, so he's down in Florida now. Potentially maybe even do some pathway stuff down there.
He's
But,
launching Pathways to Life, yeah.
and maybe even back and forth, he may be able to teach some here, but that's what he's saying, is that the kids get familiar with the instructors, and so then it's kind of like, hey, we're looking forward to it, and they see them, it's like, oh, Pathways. And it's very candidly, the puberty talks, the girls, especially because they're more aware of what's going on, they feel a little bit more awkward about it. The boys oftentimes are still like, does this even apply to me? Like, is this gonna happen to me someday, sort of thing? Where the girls oftentimes in sixth grade are in the middle of it, or close to it. So, the boys are typically like, that's cool,
I went in there in sixth
whatever.
grade, and the next year I came back in seventh grade, there was kids like this
Yes.
tall. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then-
What are the typical maybe questions that come up in the sessions, like, I have a daughter, so maybe from your perspective?
You want to share about the girls' questions?
Well, I'll say I've done the infant lessons in high school so far, and I think they really engage in it because it's something that directly applies to them. I mean, they're definitely curious about it, right? And I think it is a little bit awkward at first, but just opening a safe space where they can kind of be vulnerable and ask some different questions. I think they're responding pretty well. Yeah, I think.
Typically with the puberty stuff, and speaking with, so Jessica was the presenter who did with work with the girls last year. They didn't really ask any questions. It was just like, we're trying to absorb information and then bring home whatever questions they had. From what I understand,
Yeah.
girls were going home and asking those
When we
questions.
do tell them, like, hey, if there's something that's come up to you and you need to invite somebody into that, like it's something you want to revisit, Yes, ma'am.
Kind of on piggybacking on that, I think you mentioned you were gonna send us content. So is that gonna come in emails, like, so we can know more about vaping if they come home with questions
Yes.
about it and stuff like that?
Yeah, so look, the week of the presentation that they'll get, or the lessons that they'll get, look for an email from me, and it'll have talking points in there. Just kind of, and typically what that is questions derived from the lesson they're gonna teach. So it may be things that you can talk to them ahead of time, it may be things you can talk to them on the back end as well.
And we can send a resource along with that, but we're actually launching our social media. We'll be filtering a lot of resources to parents through that.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot of like very current, new information.
Yeah, it's hard keeping up.
It really is.
Well, and where do you get the right information? So
Yeah.
what we do is we get it and then we filter
Yeah.
it and then we'll be
Yeah.
sending it out.
I mean, yeah, like for instance, the Jewel CEO actually resigned yesterday,
Mhm.
and they brought in a CEO from Marlboro.
Yeah,
So they're
from
actually gonna
Tobacco.
have better strategies to market to your kids now.
Well, but
Yeah.
more covert, but like
Yes.
Marlboro, they, you know what they did with all their money? They invested in the weed market.
Mhm.
So a lot of these companies are like linked, because they had to reinvent themselves, because once we figured out that smoking is terrible, like nobody smokes anymore, right? So they're like, oh, here's a safe alternative to cigarettes.
Yeah.
You got a whole generation of people addicted to nicotine.
Well, they bought a big stake in Jewel too.
They did,
You
yeah.
know, They know, you know, they've got to have an avenue for their revenue.
That's right, yeah, and marijuana's, and then the marijuana's the thing coming down the pipe. The medical thing was kind of like the Trojan horse for the back end, you know, and so.
Nobody saw that coming.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, so we'll help do that. You want me to pray for them? So.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we wanna be sensitive to your time. If you've got more questions, we've got a couple more minutes, but, yeah, we can close in prayer and
Yeah.
have y'all on your way.
Yeah, Father, thank you for parents. And the beauty of your creative geniuses is that you're our parent. And you're a good father, and you care for us, and yet you're in heaven, but you're well aware of what's going on earth. And so, Lord, as we have a conversation like this, it can be, the enemy can use it to work us up and to get us to focus down on the things that are happening in our world and miss out on the big picture of your redemptive work in the world and in our lives. And so, God, I think it's important that we are socially conscious and that we are aware, but yet that we are spirit empowered. And so, God, I just pray for your power. You pour your spirit out on the parents here, and their desire is to protect and correct and to see their young people reach their full potential. And so, God, give them wisdom and knowledge and patience and discernment. Teach them how to walk with you and walking alongside of them in a way that is protective and corrective and helpful. And so, Lord, we're grateful that we have you as our hope. And yet we have your presence and your power to live out our lives in the day-to-day. And so, Lord, protect our children, protect their children. Thank you for Wesleyan and the opportunity to partner with them. And Lord, we just give this day to you, and we ask these things in Christ's name.